purpose of doing competitive intelligence is to help you make the right decision, but sometimes you have to make what is essentially a scientific wild-ass guess. Looking outside and measuring them as well as yourself is an enormously powerful tool.
Hi, I'm Bruno Aziza, and today I'm meeting with Michael Sandman, who is Senior Vice President at Fold. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
So people in the audience here might think they understand their metrics, and internal metrics certainly, but what your company specializes in is how you can help them understand what the competition is doing and why they're doing it. You're a strategic consultancy in competitive intelligence, and so you help large organizations do that across the world. Tell us, what is competitive intelligence?
Sure. Competitive intelligence is information about what the competitor is doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, that can help you understand a competitor's actions today in the marketplace and their likely actions in the future. And most important of all, we want people to use competitive intelligence to understand what decisions they ought to be making vis-a-vis the competitors and vis-a-vis their own operations.
So this is more than just measuring what the competition revenues are or their investment in innovation or anything like that, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is what's going on inside that's contributing to those revenues or contributing to that level of profitability.
Do you have an example of an organization that's doing very well in competitive intelligence?
Sure. I have more than one, I think. I'll give you one example from the retail industry.
Sure.
We're working with a client who is seeking to understand what advantage one of its major competitors is getting from the use of self-checkout in grocery stores. And
so self-checkout is those machines, those automated machines that I use to just check out.
Right, you
get out
walk up and you scan the thing on the bottom of the orange, the barcode or whatever it is. Okay. And you can take a couple of views of using automated or self-checkout systems. One is you can say, well, this is a way to cut costs. I need fewer employees. But then you also have to recognize that you're transferring the burden to the customers to do the work. And some customers don't like that very much. And one of the things that we found on behalf of one company who was essentially thinking that way was that the competitor was using some of their staff to teach customers how to use the machines in a way that was certainly non-intrusive, it was friendly, it made the customers almost enjoy the experience, and they didn't feel like it was a burden. And the customers were returning. They were getting a much better level of repeat business from people who had used those machines than our client was.
So this is interesting because this is a different perspective on how you use technology to reduce costs. I mean, right. Further, how to use technology to compete better. How did you find out about this? I mean, what's the process for any organization to even know what the competitor is doing?
Sure. Well, certainly one of the places to start is within the organization itself. Very often, companies will have done their own market research, talk to the customers, talk to the competitors' customers. But ultimately, what we did. It was observed that that the competitor was getting a good level of repeat business. People weren't having any problem with the self-checkout process, and ultimately we talked to the competitor. And you think, oh God, how do you do that? Are they they won't give you confidential information? And no, of course they don't. But they will tell you some things about how they work and what they're thinking about. They won't give you numbers and detail, but they'll certainly tell you why, in general, what they're doing seems to work for them. And it's that information, that qualitative information, that you use in order to figure out what's going on.
And so that's really a great best practice in terms of how you think about using information and broadening your perspective. Your customers have options, and sometimes you need to understand why they're choosing those options so you can win. It's not just about replicating a practice or simply just cutting costs using technology.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, you certainly, in a lot of situations, what we want to do is explain to a client why and how a competitor is doing something, recognizing fully that the competitor is doing something different and should be doing something different because our client has a different approach to the business. So if you're trying to be the lowest cost provider, you want to take a particular approach. If you're trying to add value in a way such that you don't have to compete on price, you take a somewhat different approach, and you'll use technology differently in those two companies.
I think for CIOs listening, this has a huge consequence to how they think about providing data to their senior management and also the people in the store, in the front line, so they understand the dynamics of what's going on. Certainly, they can observe some of it, but getting a trend across the organization is useful. Are there other examples where completeness, either perspective or completeness of data, could be useful? Often, when you think about information management, you wait until you have the perfect picture before you can take action. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think the difficulty with waiting until you have perfect information is that by the time you have that perfect information, either you're dead or the time for a decision has passed. The truth of the matter is that you never get quite as much information as you want before you have to make a decision in most circumstances. And the purpose of doing competitive intelligence is to help you make the right decision, but sometimes you have to make what is essentially a scientific wild-ass guess. The more information that you have, the more sense that you have, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, from the marketplace, from the competition itself, from customers, from channels, distribution channels, from vendors to both companies. The more information of that sort that you have, the better off you are. But there comes a time when you simply have to say, okay, we have enough to make this decision with 90% certainty, and that's all we're going to get.
So I think this is a great example for business intelligence practitioners and analysts, specialists in that field. Is often we think about data versus experience. And what you're saying here is that actually they complement each other. And you've got to be comfortable up to a certain number of numbers or data and up to a certain level of experience to complement the data you have, because the value and the competitive advantage is the speed at which you can make those decisions. Do you have examples of organizations that either don't wait for the completeness of data or act more on experience?
Well, I'll give you an example from the aerospace industry, from a company that lost a bid to supply the black box controller, cabin pressure controller for the Boeing 777, at the point that the 777 was being designed, about 12 or 15 years ago. And they had previously pretty much owned that business with Boeing, and they were pretty disappointed. And so they came to us and they said, essentially, what happened? We were underbid. Were the competitors, or was the competitor just buying the business, or what happened to us? And we went out and we were able to talk to engineers in the organization that won the business, and we didn't ask them for numbers. We said to them, how do you do your work, and what's changed? And they reported back to us that first of all, they loved the question. It gave them a chance to talk. People love to talk about their work. And so they told us about what they had done, and that some software engineering tools had made it possible for them to operate more, to write software more efficiently, to reuse portions of code without having to retest it, that they had made some changes in the way they did the wrote specifications for code. There were a whole range of small things that they had done in order to reduce the number of total hours required to build the software that was going to run the black box computer. And the total, when you added it all up, was worth more or less 100,000 man-hours of software engineering time. And nobody gave us a number and said, well, we saved X number of hours. But what we did was go back to our client and said, if you did it this way, how many hours would it take you versus the way you did it? And we'd gotten some acquaintance with the way they did it. We had some understanding of that. And when they wrote all of this down, and they recognized that there was, plus or minus 10% in their estimates, just the same, it added up to a very big number. 100,000 man-hours is worth, more or less at the time, it was worth about $10 million. And they've lost the bid largely because of that estimate. Their estimate was off by actually a bit more than $10 million, because there were some other things that the competitor had also done to reduce the cost of creating both the software and the hardware that went into the system.
This is a great example, Michael. So as we close here and we give a few lessons for the audience here, I'm hearing a couple of things. The first thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, competitive intelligence is not just about the metrics themselves, but it's about understanding the context, the factors around the metric, what's driving performance.
Right.
I think one of the things that's new is this idea of using competitive intelligence not just in one department, but across the organization and tying this to strategy. And then thirdly, as you think about architecting your information management systems, just think broader than just a simple picture of the performance of your organization and comparing the performance this year to the performance last year. Your customers, your shareholders, everybody's got options, and they certainly have access to different options than you might be offering as an organization. Is that right? Is there anything you want to add?
No, that's great. I think you make exactly the right point, that there's an opportunity by looking outside to learn what somebody else is doing either better or differently that might cause you to change. It might cause you to decide that you want to stay exactly where you are. But looking outside and measuring them as well as yourself is an enormously powerful tool.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
People can find out more by going to www.fold.com. And until next time, I'm Bruno Ziza.